HOA Karen kept destroying my fence, so I put up a surprise that wrecked her car. I never thought I'd become the guy who goes to war with his HOA, but here we are. This whole mess started about 2 years ago when my wife and I finally saved enough for our first home. After months of searching, we found a nice place in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. Sure, it had an HOA, but the fees seemed reasonable, and the place looked great. What could go wrong? The first red flag appeared during our closing meeting. The previous owner leaned in and whispered, "Watch out for the HOA president. She's intense," he chuckled nervously, and I brushed it off as typical neighborhood politics. I should have paid more attention. We moved in on a Saturday, and by Monday morning, there was an official HOA letter in our mailbox complaining about the moving truck that had been parked in our driveway over the weekend. Apparently, commercial vehicles were only allowed between 9 to 5 on weekdays, and we'd violated this sacred rule. The letter was signed by the HOA president, who lived 3 houses down from us. My wife wanted to introduce ourselves properly, so we baked cookies and walked over. The HOA president opened the door before we even knocked. She was in her early 50s, with a short blonde bob and an expression like she'd just smelled something unpleasant. "You must be the new neighbors," she said, looking us up and down. "I'm the HOA president." "Nice to meet you," I said, offering the cookies. "We got your letter and wanted to apologize about the truck. We didn't know the rules yet." She took the cookies with a tight smile. "Yes, well, rules are rules. You'll need to review the HOA bylaws thoroughly. I've had to send out 5 violation notices this week alone." She said this like it was something to be proud of. "We'll definitely read through everything," my wife promised. The HOA president nodded. "See that you do. By the way, you'll need to replace that hedge along your driveway. It's not on the approved plant list." And so began our introduction to life under her reign. The hedge in question was a beautiful row of boxwoods that had clearly been there for decades. They were healthy, neatly trimmed, and frankly, one of the features we loved about the house. But according to the HOA president, they weren't on the approved vegetation list and needed to be removed within 30 days. I spent an evening going through the enormous binder of HOA rules and located the vegetation guidelines. Boxwoods were indeed not on the approved list, but there was a grandfather clause for existing vegetation planted before 2010. Our hedge qualified. I typed up a polite response citing this clause and dropped it in the HOA president's mailbox. 2 days later, I arrived home from work to find tire tracks through part of my hedge. 3 of the bushes were crushed, with clear evidence that a vehicle had run over them. At first, I thought it was just a careless driver who had taken the corner too sharply. I was annoyed but figured I'd just replace the damaged plants. The next day, I was working from home and happened to glance out the window around lunchtime. I watched in disbelief as the HOA president's white Lexus SUV deliberately veered off the road as she turned onto our street, running directly over my damaged hedge again. This wasn't an accident. She was intentionally destroying my property. I ran outside, but she had already parked in her driveway and disappeared inside her house. I was fuming but decided to document the damage first. I took photos of the crushed plants, the tire tracks, and the obvious pattern of destruction. That evening, I went to speak with her directly. I rang her doorbell, photos in hand, ready for a civil but firm conversation. She opened the door with that same pinched expression. "Yes? I saw you drive over my hedge today," I said, skipping pleasantries. "I have photos. This is the second time it's been damaged." She crossed her arms. "I don't know what you're talking about. Perhaps your non-compliant hedge is simply falling apart because it's not suitable for our neighborhood aesthetic." "It's not non-compliant, and we both know you did this," I insisted, showing her the photos of her distinctive white SUV. She barely glanced at them. "Those could be anyone's car. Besides, if your hedge was properly set back from the road according to HOA guidelines, this wouldn't be an issue. The hedge is exactly where it's supposed to be," I argued. "It's been there for 20 years. "Well," she said with a smirk, "if you had replaced it with approved plants as instructed, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Good evening." And she closed the door in my face. I was stunned. This woman was deliberately destroying my property to force me to remove the hedge that she had no actual authority to make me remove. It was petty, vindictive, and completely insane. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, which resulted in nothing because, surprise, surprise, the president controlled the board with an iron fist. I then installed a small security camera aimed at the hedge, hoping the presence of surveillance would deter her. It didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, she accidentally drove over my hedge 4 more times, always when turning onto our street. Each time, I documented it with photos and video. And each time, she denied any wrongdoing. I replaced the damaged plants twice before realizing this was becoming a costly game of chicken. She was determined to destroy my hedge until I gave in and replaced the entire thing with whatever boring shrubs were on her approved list. After the 6th incident, I'd had enough. It was time to fight back, but I needed to be strategic about it. Direct confrontation wasn't working, and I didn't want to stoop to her level of pettiness. I needed a solution that would protect my property and teach her a lesson without breaking any rules myself. I called my buddy Mike, who works in construction, and explained the situation. He laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Dude," he said when he finally stopped laughing, "I've got the perfect solution. And it's completely legal." The following Saturday, Mike arrived with his truck and equipment. We spent the day removing the damaged section of hedge, about 8 feet of bushes where she kept running them over. In their place, we dug a trench and poured a concrete footing. Once it was set, we built what looked like a decorative planter box using railway ties, filled it with soil, and transplanted some of the surviving hedge sections back into it. From the street, it looked like we had simply replaced the damaged hedge with a rustic-looking planter containing the same type of bushes. But beneath that innocent exterior was a solid concrete barrier that would stand up to a vehicle impact. "This should do the trick," Mike said, admiring our work. "The planter's edge is recessed 6 inches from where the original hedge was, so she can't claim you've encroached on anything. And if she hits it, well, her car's going to have a bad day," I finished, feeling a mix of anticipation and guilt. I didn't actually want to damage her car, but I was tired of replacing my hedge every other week. We didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I was again working from home when I heard a loud crash followed by the sound of a car horn. I rushed to the window to see the HOA president's white Lexus with its front end crumpled against my reinforced planter. The airbag had deployed, and she was sitting in the driver's seat, looking dazed. I called cop and ran outside to check on her. Despite everything, I didn't want her to be hurt. "Are you okay?" I asked, approaching the vehicle. She was pressing her hand to her forehead, where a red mark was forming from the airbag impact. "You did this on purpose," she shrieked as soon as she saw me. "You set a trap. I'm going to sue you for everything you have." By this time, neighbors were coming out of their homes to see what had happened. One of them was a retired police officer who lived next door to me. He came over to help. "What happened here?" he asked. Before I could answer, the HOA president launched into her version of events. "He built an illegal structure that damaged my car. He's been harassing me for weeks." I sighed and pulled out my phone. "Actually, I have video evidence of her repeatedly driving over my hedge over the past month. After the 6th time, I replaced it with a more durable planter that's fully within my property lines and complies with all HOA regulations. I have the plans and permits if you'd like to see them." This wasn't entirely true. I didn't have a permit for the planter because our HOA and city didn't require one for structures under a certain size, but she didn't know that. My neighbor raised an eyebrow. "You've been deliberately driving over his hedge?" The HOA president's face flushed. "That's ridiculous. I've never done such a thing." "I'd be happy to show the police the footage when they arrive," I said calmly. As if on cue, we heard sirens in the distance. The HOA president suddenly looked less confident. The police arrived, followed closely by an ambulance. The paramedics checked her out while I spoke with the officers. I showed them the video footage from my security camera, documenting the multiple times she had driven over my hedge. I also explained how I had filed complaints with the HOA board and tried to resolve the issue peacefully. The officers took statements from both of us and some of the neighbors who had witnessed her behavior over the past weeks. While they were sympathetic to my situation, they said this was primarily a civil matter, though they did note in their report that the HOA president had been driving carelessly. As the tow truck arrived to take her crumpled Lexus away, one of the officers approached me. "Nice planter," he said with a barely concealed smile. "Perfectly legal, by the way. You have every right to protect your property as long as it's within your property line." The HOA president was fuming as she got into the ambulance for a precautionary checkup at the hospital. She pointed at me and yelled, "This isn't over." But in many ways, it was. News travels fast in small neighborhoods, and by evening, everyone knew about the HOA president's repeated attempts to destroy my hedge and how it had spectacularly backfired. Several neighbors who had been similarly harassed by her reached out to share their stories and thank me for standing up to her. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from her lawyer, demanding I pay for the damage to her car and her medical expenses. The letter claimed I had maliciously constructed a dangerous and invisible barrier with the intent to cause harm. I forwarded the letter to my homeowner's insurance company, who assigned a lawyer to my case. He reviewed my documentation and security footage and sent a response that essentially told her lawyer to pound sand. He pointed out that I had ample evidence of her repeated vandalism of my property and that the planter was a legal structure built entirely within my property line. He suggested that pressing the matter would likely result in a countersuit for the damage she had done to my hedge. We didn't hear back from her lawyer after that. What we did hear, about a week later, was even better. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to address recent events. I attended, along with nearly every other homeowner in the neighborhood. The atmosphere was tense as the vice president of the board explained that they were voting on whether to remove the president from her position due to actions unbecoming of a board member. The HOA president sat stiffly in her chair at the front of the room, a small bandage still visible on her forehead. When given a chance to speak, she claimed she was the victim of a vindictive new homeowner who refused to follow HOA rules, meaning me, of course. Then, one by one, other homeowners stood up to share their experiences with her. Stories of petty violations, selective enforcement of rules, and personal vendettas poured out. It seemed everyone had a tale about how she had made their lives miserable over paint colors, mailbox heights, or the types of flowers they could plant. The vote wasn't even close. She was removed from the board effective immediately, with the vice president stepping in as interim president until a proper election could be held. As people were leaving the meeting, an older gentleman who had been on the original HOA board years ago approached me. "That hedge of yours," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "It was actually my idea back in the day. Looks good with that new planter section." I smiled. "Thanks, it's staying right where it is." He nodded. "As it should. You know, we're going to need some new blood on the board after all this. Someone who respects the original vision of the neighborhood but isn't drunk on power. You should consider running." I laughed. "Me? I'm the guy who just built a concrete barrier to take out the president's car." "Exactly," he said. "You're creative and you stand up for what's right. Think about it." And surprisingly, I did think about it. In fact, 3 months later, I found myself elected to the HOA board along with several other homeowners who wanted to reform how things were run. We immediately set about revising some of the more ridiculous rules and creating a more transparent system for handling complaints. As for the former HOA president, she put her house on the market shortly after being removed from the board. I heard she moved to a condo downtown with no HOA at all. Apparently, she'd had enough of community living. My hedge and planter are still going strong, and they've become something of a local landmark. Sometimes I catch people slowing down as they drive by, perhaps wondering if the rumors are true about what lies beneath those innocent-looking bushes. And yes, I did eventually get a proper permit for the planter, just to be safe. The new HOA board approved it unanimously. In the end, I realized that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even if it means installing a concrete barrier to do it. But more importantly, I learned that one person really can make a difference in their community, whether by protecting a beloved hedge or by helping to create a more reasonable HOA. And for those wondering, my wife thinks the whole thing was ridiculous, but she was the one who suggested we install similar planters around the rest of the property. "Just in case," she said with a wink. I love that woman. Update. 1 year later. It's been just over a year since the infamous planter incident that changed our neighborhood forever, and I thought you all deserved an update on what's happened since then. First off, remember how the former HOA president put her house on the market? Well, it sat there for months with no takers. Turns out, she had made so many enemies in the neighborhood that word got around to potential buyers. Real estate agents are required to disclose certain things, and while the seller was voted out as HOA president for harassment isn't technically on that list, our neighborhood grapevine worked overtime. She finally sold the place for well below asking price, and I heard through the neighborhood gossip mill that she tried to blame me for her financial loss. She even attempted to revive her legal threats against me, sending another letter demanding compensation for her car repairs, medical bills, and now the loss on her home sale. My insurance company's lawyer didn't just send a dismissal this time. He went on the offensive, sending her a formal letter stating that any further harassment would result in a restraining order and a countersuit for the documented damage to my property. He included copies of all the security footage, police reports, and witness statements we had collected. We never heard from her again after that. Last I heard, she moved to a different state entirely. Good riddance. As for me, I did end up joining the HOA board, and it's been an interesting experience to say the least. Our first order of business was a complete overhaul of the HOA rules. We threw out the ridiculous 200-page binder of nitpicky regulations and replaced it with a simple 20-page document focused on maintaining property values without micromanaging everyone's lives. The approved vegetation list that started this whole mess? Gone. Instead, we now have basic guidelines. Keep your garden maintained, don't let weeds take over, and don't plant invasive species that could spread to other properties. That's it. Our second project was addressing the HOA finances. Turns out, the former president had been using HOA funds for some questionable purposes. She had hired her brother-in-law's landscaping company at double the market rate and approved unnecessary improvements to the areas nearest her home while ignoring needs in other parts of the neighborhood. "I can't believe no one noticed this before," I said during an emergency board meeting after our audit revealed the extent of the financial mismanagement. "Oh, people noticed," said Martha, a longtime resident who had joined the board with me, but she would threaten anyone who questioned her with violation notices and fines. Most folks decided it wasn't worth the fight. With the financial issues exposed, we filed an insurance claim against the HOA fidelity bond, which is basically insurance that protects against theft or misuse of funds by board members. The insurance company conducted their own investigation and ultimately paid out nearly $30,000 to the HOA, money that should have been in our reserves but had been siphoned away over the years. They also pursued their own case against the former president to recover those funds. I'm not privy to all the details, but I do know she ended up settling rather than facing a civil trial where all her misdeeds would become public record. The recovered money allowed us to address some long-neglected maintenance issues in the community without raising HOA fees. We fixed the crumbling retaining wall behind the community playground, repaved the worst sections of sidewalk, and upgraded the outdated irrigation system in the common areas to reduce water waste. These improvements made an immediate difference in the neighborhood's appearance, and residents who had been hostile toward the HOA started engaging positively. At our quarterly meetings, instead of angry complaints, we began getting thank you notes and constructive suggestions. My infamous planter has become something of a neighborhood legend. New residents get told the story within days of moving in, usually with a lot of embellishment. According to some versions, the former president's car flipped 3 times after hitting it, or the planter contained steel rebar spikes. It didn't. That would have been illegal and dangerous. About 6 months after the incident, I installed a small decorative fence around all my planter boxes, partly to protect the plants from our new puppy and partly to make absolutely sure no one could claim they were a hazard. The fence is fully compliant with our new, simplified HOA guidelines, of course. My next-door neighbor Tom, the retired police officer who witnessed the whole planter incident, stopped by while I was installing the fence. "Reinforcing your defenses?" he asked with a grin. "Just being thorough," I replied. "Don't want any more surprise vehicle collisions on my property." He laughed. "You know, I've lived here 15 years, and that woman made at least 10 of those years miserable. What you did standing up to her didn't just fix your hedge problem. It fixed the whole neighborhood." I hadn't really thought about it that way, but he was right. By refusing to back down and finding a creative and legal solution to protect my property, I had inadvertently sparked a revolution that improved life for everyone here. There was one more twist in this saga that I should mention. About 3 months ago, I received a thick envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $2,500 and a handwritten note that simply said, "For hedge repairs and your trouble." Not everyone in her family approved of her behavior. The check was from the former president's husband. It was written from his personal account, not their joint account, and had clearly been sent without her knowledge. I called the number on the check to thank him, and we had a surprisingly candid conversation. "I tried to get her to stop harassing you about that hedge," he told me, "but she got fixated on it, and once she gets an idea in her head, well, you experienced that firsthand." "I appreciate the gesture," I said, "but you don't need to clean up her messes." "Trust me," he replied with a sigh. "I've been doing it for 30 years. At least this is the last one I'll have to deal with." Turned out they had divorced shortly after moving away. The car incident, the public humiliation, and the financial repercussions had been the final straw in what was apparently a troubled marriage. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. I ended up using that money to install a professional-grade security system for our home, with high-definition cameras covering every inch of our property. Not because I'm paranoid that she'll come back for revenge someday, but because it feels good to know that if anyone ever tries to mess with my property again, I'll have crystal-clear evidence. As for my hedge, it's thriving. I even propagated some cuttings from the original plants to extend it along the full length of our property line. Each new section is planted in its own reinforced concrete planter, though I doubt they'll ever need to serve their secondary purpose as car stoppers again. The lesson I learned from all this wasn't just about standing up to bullies or the importance of security cameras. It was about community. By refusing to let one person's petty tyranny dictate my choices, I discovered that many of my neighbors felt the same way I did. They were just waiting for someone to take a stand. Our neighborhood is a different place now. People chat in their front yards, kids play together in the common areas, and the HOA board meetings are actually pleasant affairs with coffee and cookies instead of tension and threats. All because of a hedge, a concrete planter, and the unwillingness to back down from what was right. Sometimes that's all it takes to change things for the better. And yes, for those wondering, my wife still thinks the whole thing was ridiculous. But yesterday I caught her patting one of the planter boxes affectionately as she walked past it. "Making friends with the concrete?" I teased. She smiled. "Just thanking it for giving us the neighborhood we always wanted." I couldn't have said it better myself. The next one is entitled People Story. Hi Honorable Judge Charlotte and Potato Queens and Kings, editor's note nickname for Charlotte Dobra fans, I have come seeking your advice. I will accept my judgment. I get married in April. We got engaged at Christmas, but in January my dad was given 5 months max after being taken off chemo for it not working. I will preface this by saying I never wanted the big white wedding. I am not a fan of being the center stage, etc. My best friend, 26F, of 14 plus years, is the polar opposite of me. My partner and I have been super busy with work, so have allowed my parents to plan the wedding. His parents are out the country on holobobs but have had input. My dad wanted a bigger celebration as this will be the last chance he gets to celebrate. I am obviously heartbroken and want to give him exactly what he wants. I chose my bridesmaids and my partner chose his best man, groomsmen. My best friend is one of my bridesmaids and my niece is my other. My beastie from day one of being asked has been finding dresses, not a problem. I've said all along, I just want them to feel comfortable so to wear what they want. I am paying. Some of the dresses were questionable, but I honestly didn't have the heart to tell her. Men's suits were all chosen and everyone was happy. A little side note here, my parents have never been a fan of my beastie. They think she's an attention seeker and a bit of a tart. They accepted my choice because they know I love her to bits. Last week when we went to see my beastie, she had a baby recently so love going to see Bubba. She was saying I think her partner, let's call him Paul is going to propose at your wedding and getting all excited. She kept saying how she wanted it to be a perfect proposal and we have the perfect venue. That is true, the venue is stunning. On the way home from seeing her, I was talking to my partner and said that I didn't want him to propose at the wedding, as we were already celebrating a wedding and my beautiful daddy, and didn't want to take away from that. I reached out and tried to explain this to Bestie. Her reply: if you are going to be a bridezilla, I don't want to be part of your rushed wedding. If you can't stand other people getting attention, you're really pathetic and need to get over yourself. Here I will input, partner and I have been together 4 years, her and partner have been together 1 year. Not that this is any sort of competition. But here is where I may be the bridezilla, a hole. My response: I'm truly sorry you feel like I've been a bridezilla, a hole. I've tried to be accommodating and as free-willed as possible. You've had your choice of dress, shoes, hair, makeup, accessories, which were all paid for by me, and we have accommodated bringing your baby, which of course we would as we love you. You know I don't like major attention, but this is my family, my friends, and they're coming to our wedding. If you're so desperate for the attention on you, perhaps it's best you're not there. I'm sorry that this hasn't working out. I'm truly heartbroken. But this day needs to be perfect for my daddy. Her last response: I didn't respond. Your dad's gonna die. He won't even be here to give a crap. I don't mind losing her over this, but I'm heartbroken and now thinking I may have been a bridezilla. Please help Potato Kings, Queens, and everyone in between. Thank you to everyone that gave comments, feedback, support, and advice. And as I'm sure you all expected, we have an update. He was going to leave her, not propose. So my partner and I reached out to him, asked him to meet in a neutral place. We chose the park near to his house. He agreed to meet us, alone. Side note, we live about 2 hours apart since I moved out of my parents and we moved to a different city. I travel most weekends to see my parents. I showed him the messages, from the screenshots shown in my last post, and he was raging. Paul was so angry at what had been said, then turned to us and said I actually wanted to leave her, but was waiting until after the wedding as to not ruin the day for you and your dad. We had a long chat. Paul and my partner have a lot in common and he's always been lush to the both of us. We drove him home and left. Driving the 2 hours home I felt relieved. I've never felt so stress-free. I had no one to try and please. And who needs an egg-sucking bridesmaid anyway? Paul rang when we got home. They've split up. She tried to deny the messages, but didn't delete them from her phone so he knew it was true. He told her he was repulsed and was planning on leaving after she'd been unkind to his mom, also ill. Paul wants an amicable split with baby, so we'll possibly getting lawyers involved. My daddy is over the moon. He's heartbroken that I've lost pretty much my only friend, but he's so glad she's gone. He's surviving day to day and we are giving him the best we possibly can. We took him suit shopping and he looks absolutely incredible. My mom hasn't got her dress yet, but we are having a special girly day out soon. Dresses, spa day, and just overall love. Major updates. 1. Passwords with vendors. 2. Paul is still coming, either alone or with a friend or someone else. He deserves a break. 3. Paul is going to tell her parents, who are massively religious and massively strict and will not tolerate bullies. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.